Hey guys, I'm back with another video. I actually already filmed this video once, but I just couldn't bring myself to upload it. I tried to edit it and it just didn't feel like it was the quality that I wanted on my channel. So here I am filming it again, only this time I have handy dandy note cards. Yeah, we're gonna do it this way because I had a bunch of notes on 3 different pages of notebook paper. It just wasn't working for me. I had things crammed, I was scribbling stuff out, writing stuff in, and then when it came to actually filming the video, I had no idea what I was talking about. It was everywhere, so I decided to just go ahead and refilm it for you guys. So, I'm gonna start by saying that this video in particular is one that definitely hits close to home for me. It happened out of Paris, California, and if you've been watching the news or read any media sources, you know, social media, that kind of stuff, you're gonna know probably what I'm talking about. This is just a heartbreaking story, and I have been glued to any news source trying to gather as much information as I can because I'm just so intrigued, and my heart breaks for these siblings that are going through this. So I'm gonna go ahead and jump right in. What if I told you that on January 14th, 2018, this year, last month, a 10-year-old girl called 911 and reported that her and her 12 siblings were being held captive in their Paris, California home. There were a total of 6 children and 7 adults. The children ranged from age 2 to 29, so technically they're not even children. They are full-grown adults being held captive. I decided I'm going to go ahead and backtrack a little bit after telling you that little tidbit, and then I'll work my way up to what happened. So, 56-year-old David Allen Turpin and 49-year-old Louise Ann Turpin met in 1985 when she was just 16 and he was 23. They went ahead and ran away to get married and didn't return home until the police caught up to them and returned them to Louise's parents. They were married on February 11th, 1985 in Giles or Giles, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce that, Giles County, Virginia. Soon after that, they ended up moving to Princeton, West Virginia, and then they moved to Fort Worth, Texas. Most people think that the abuse started when they moved to Fort Worth, Texas. Reports say that the parents lived apart and would deliver food to the children from time to time. Now, I don't know if that means that David and Louise were separated, or if that means that they were living away from the children and the children were on their own and they would go ahead and bring them food from time to time. I tried to do some research and I couldn't really figure out what that was about, so we're gonna have to just kind of leave it at that, sorry. The thing that breaks my heart the most about this story is the fact that when the oldest girl was in 3rd grade in Fort Worth, Texas, she apparently went to school smelling like poop, and she would wear the exact same purple jumpsuit every single day, and it was dirty and it smelled. And she had a Hershey's wrapper that she would use to tie up her hair. Now, this is coming from a witness who I will also talk about later on in this video. It just amazes me and saddens me that during this whole time that this was happening, not one teacher decided that maybe they should call the police or CPS to do a welfare check. If I had a student coming into my classroom wearing the exact same outfit day in and day out and she smelled of feces, I would immediately be trying to figure out what was going on. She had no rubber band to hold up her hair. She had a candy bar wrapper. I don't know why nobody stepped in at that point, but nobody did. And eventually they moved to Marietta, California in 2010. Now, when they were living there, I don't know if they opened up the homeschool at that location or when they moved to Paris, but I think they opened up their homeschool while they were living in the Marietta location, because if you look up the Turpin Sandcastle Day School, it says that it was opened in 2011 and they didn't move to Paris, California until 2014. So I think it's safe to assume that they opened the homeschool there, where the abuse definitely escalated. Neighbors would often witness the parents walking the children around in the middle of the night in circles. They would witness them in the middle of the night loading the children up into a van. And again, not one person called anybody to report this. Now imagine, you can't sleep and you wake up in the middle of the night to get yourself a glass of water. You look outside and you see your neighbors across the street walking their kids around in circles at 3 o'clock in the morning. Why would that not raise any warning signs to you? I'm not saying it's their fault. It's not. But I think it makes you really wonder if all those times where you have that little gut feeling saying, is this something I should be reporting? Maybe you should. I think at this point, with some of the things that are coming out about different situations of abuse and neglect, maybe the best thing is to call and report it and let them figure it out. The reason that they would have the children walking around at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning and loading them into vans is because they technically had them living a nocturnal life. They were to go to bed at 4 to 5 o'clock in the morning and they would sleep until sundown. So for some strange reason in their head, they had them on a reverse schedule. One of the neighbors also met one of the sons. I don't know if he was the oldest, middle, or youngest, but at the time he was 20 years old, explained that to the neighbors when they shook his hand, and the neighbor truly thought that he was probably 15 because he looked so young. They ended up moving from Marietta, California to Paris, California in 2014. Now, this is very, very, very close to Hemet, California. And that is where I grew up. I grew up in Hemet, California. I was born in San Diego, but lived the majority of my life there. Now, from my dad's front door to the Turpin's front door, it's a 16.2 mile drive. Which isn't a lot at all. So to me, it's crazy that things like this can happen anywhere. Once they moved to their Paris home, that's when the abuse really started to get bad. During their homeschooling, they were made to memorize very long passages and scriptures from the Bible, and some of the children can actually recite the whole Bible. And that's a lot of man hours to be able to sit down and memorize a book that big. There's so many chapters, there's so many scriptures. It's crazy that they were forced to memorize that much. During that time, one of the children was also able to attend college. He actually attended the Marietta location of Mount San Jacinto College. And witnesses that knew the boy and were in the same class as him, I shouldn't say boy, he was older, he was an adult, but you're gonna probably catch me doing that a lot. Sorry, it's just when you think of what's happening to them, you automatically think that they're probably a little kid, but in all actuality, they're grown adults. Witnesses at the location where he attended school said that he was incredibly quiet, he was incredibly introverted, he had a bowl haircut just like his dad, and that his mom would actually walk him from each class and sit outside and wait for him. So he was never left alone. Although he was allowed to attend school, he was still treated the same as the other children when he got home. And everything that they did was punishable. Punishments were extreme. Washed your hands above the wrist, they considered that playing in the water, and you would be punished. If you snuck food, you would be punished. Everything was punishable. A lot of times the Turpin parents during the holidays would go ahead and buy pies. They would buy a pumpkin pie, an apple pie. They would set those pies on the counter, and they wouldn't let any of the children eat them. They would let them rot, and they would make the children look at the pies, but they weren't allowed to touch them. They weren't allowed to eat them. They weren't allowed to enjoy them. They were also known to buy themselves food and then not feed the children. They actually fed the children on a schedule. They usually fed them once to twice a week, so all of the children were extremely malnourished. This part really breaks my heart, and it's hard for me to talk about it, so I'm sorry if there's stuttering and pauses, but I just can't imagine what these poor people were going through. I'm going to also go ahead and look down when I read this to you, just so that I can keep my thoughts straight. Their punishments would include being tied up for months on end with rope. Once one of the children was able to free themselves with the rope, they went ahead and changed the rope to handcuffs, chains, and padlocks. The children would be tied up for months on end and forced to lay in their own urine and feces. Even though they would be let free after a couple months, they were only allowed to shower once a year. They would also be beaten and even strangled. And the older siblings were made to police the younger siblings so that it was easier to control the whole crowd because there were 13 of them. I couldn't imagine being tied up and having to lay in my own pee and my own poop for months on end. And then even when I was allowed to get up, I wasn't able to shower. I love my showers. I love my bubble baths. My me time is a bubble bath. My me time is a shower. I love it. It's where I can unwind. It's where I feel the most calm. And then after, I feel clean. I feel rejuvenated. And I couldn't imagine having to live it with only showering once a year, and on top of that having to wear the same clothes that I went to the bathroom in. It's heartbreaking. It's absolutely heartbreaking. I cannot believe that parents can do this to their own children. The weird thing about this whole situation is during this abuse, during the years of torment that these siblings had to endure, their parents would randomly take them on vacations. Like, they would all go to Disneyland and they would all go to Vegas. Their parents were obsessed with Vegas. They loved Vegas. And in the 33 years that they were married, they actually renewed their vows 3 different times. And they would always get married by different impersonators. There's a video online that you can look up of them being married by an Elvis impersonator. There is pictures of them being taken where they're all dressed the same. Apparently the parents made them all dress the same because they thought that it was for safety measures. So any picture that you see, all of the children, all of the girls will be in the exact same dress. All the boys will be in the exact same tuxedo. There's a picture of them from Disneyland and they're all in the same thing 1 through 13 shirts from Dr. Seuss, thing 1, thing 2, thing 3, and so on. Whenever they would take pictures, for the most part, they would make them line up from youngest to oldest. And if you looked at these pictures, you would think that they were living the American dream. You would think that they were the happiest family. They're all smiling. They're, they have coordinated family outfits. They're the kind of family that you would be jealous of. They're that family that most of us would look at and be like, wow, I wish I was that family. I wish I, could be that put together. But in actuality, as soon as those children got home, they were starved. They were forced to lay in their own feces. They were tied up with chains and padlocks and handcuffs. So around 2016, the children started trying to hatch an escape plan. They knew that things weren't right and they were trying to figure out how to get themselves help. So back to the beginning. It took 2 years for these siblings to escape. The day that little 10-year-old girl escaped with the deactivated cell phone, there was actually another sibling that was going to go with her, but they were too afraid, so they stayed behind. When police got there, they didn't believe anything that the little girl was saying. They didn't even believe that she was actually 17. They thought she was 10. They finally checked her ID and realized that she was telling the truth. During that time, the parents actually had 3 of the siblings chained up to their beds And when they realized that the police were at the door, one of the parents was able to unchain two of the siblings, but left a third chained up because they didn't have time before police entered the home. The children that were unchained before the police entered the home was an 11-year-old and a 14-year-old, but there was still a 22-year-old who was chained to a bed. Now, for me personally, I can't fathom the amount of abuse that 22-year-old had to endure to be chained to a bed. I mean, when I was 22, I was trying to get my life together. I was going to school. I was hanging out with my friends. I was doing everything I could to not be at home because I didn't have a good home life. But I was able to leave. I was able to figure out who I was. They had to have been so scared, so petrified of the outside world or punishment from their parents to even allow themselves to be tied up at 22. They're adults. They could leave. But did they have the chance to leave? Were they afraid to leave? I mean, there's just so many different variables that go into this that I can't imagine what they went through. My heart breaks. I literally have no words. When the 17-year-old was asked by police if there were any pills or medication in the home or if she had been on any, the 17-year-old didn't know what pills or medication was. So I think that's pretty telling on how sheltered they kept these children. Also, some of the other children didn't know what a police officer was and didn't understand why there was a police officer there. So they were so conditioned to think that this was normal that they didn't even know there was a police officer. Police also found other children and they were all malnutritioned except for the 2-year-old. The 2-year-old was in perfect health along with their 2 dogs. And I wonder, why was the 2-year-old treated okay but the rest of them weren't? Did all of the children get treated well at that age? Was there a specific age that punishment started? I mean, I just find it a little weird that one child out of all of them was treated well. They were fed. They seemed to not be tied up. They did not seem to be abused. And as a parent of 2-year-olds, I couldn't imagine carrying them inside of my body and loving them from the day they were born and changing their diapers and feeding them and making sure that they were comfortable. And then one day just deciding that it was time for them to be abused. I couldn't imagine hitting my child. I couldn't imagine tying my child up or refusing my child food. I just don't understand how a parent can do that to their own child or to any child. As I said, all the children were malnutritioned. They were living in dark squalor. The house smelled. It was dark. There was feces everywhere. Both CPS and APS, Child Protective Services and Adult Protective Services, were called, and they removed all of the siblings from the home, and they immediately took them to the hospital where they were all admitted. They were actually admitted into 2 separate hospitals, but they were admitted and looked over and checked. I'm going to be looking down to read some of this just because there's a lot of numbers. The only thing that came out in the media regarding the details of the children's abuse is that there was a 29-year-old who only weighed 82 pounds. That's the size of an 11-year-old. So we don't know if that was a 29-year-old female or a 29-year-old male. I think it's safe to assume that it was a female because it would go along with the statement from the man talking about knowing her in 3rd grade. She's my age, but she was only 82 pounds. That's the size of an 11-year-old. There was a 12-year-old boy who weighed as much as a 7-year-old. Now, if you don't know, a 7-year-old is between 46 and 56 pounds. My kids are 2 years old and they're 30. They're kind of big kids, don't get me wrong, but 2.5. My boys are 30 pounds. This poor boy was 46 to 56 pounds. And he was 12. Doctors also found out that they had not seen any doctors in over 4 years. And some of the siblings have cognitive impairments and nerve damage due to strangulation during their stay with their parents. So not only did they tie them up and make them live in their own shit and not feed them, but they strangled them. Both David and Louise are being held on $12 million bail. They both have 40 felony counts each against them for child endangerment, torture, abuse of a dependent adult, and false imprisonment. David, Father of the Year, is also being charged with a lewd act by force of a child under 14, which means he did something sexual to his daughter who was under 14. Because I guess beating them and strangling them and not feeding them wasn't enough, he decided that they needed that too. The parents are barred from contacting children for the next 3 years, and they're forbidden to be within 100 yards from their children. Police also confiscated hundreds of journals from the house when they removed the children. Even though the children weren't allowed to leave, the children weren't really allowed to go to school, they were allowed to journal. And I guess there's lots of evidence that the police department is going to be combing through to hopefully get a better look into what happened in the household during those years. The lawyers of the Turpin couple are also hoping to take the court case outside of Riverside County because they feel there's too much publicity going on and that everyone's gonna know the story without hearing the case from the court's point, if that makes sense. If you're picked to be a juror, you're not allowed to Google anything, you're not allowed to read articles, you are not allowed to know any information besides what you're being told in the court of law. And they're worried that too many people are gonna have a flawed look of the... Sorry guys, my camera stopped recording. So, where was I? The Turpin's lawyers are more or less worried that whoever the juror is has already seen information and they're gonna be biased when it comes to sentencing and picking the correct sentence for the crimes that occurred in the home. When the extended family was asked what they thought of the whole thing, they were all shocked. They truly believed that they were living the American dream. They just talked about how Louise always wanted a large family and would always talk about how wonderful her children were, how smart they were. She talked about how she wanted a 14th child and that she really looked up to the Goslings. If Kate plus 8, John and Kate plus 8, them. She really looked up to their family. She watched their show. She would also talk about how she thought it was so funny that whenever they would take the children to Las Vegas, they would get carded because they looked so young. And that to me seems a little demented, for you to think it's funny that your kids look young and are being carded because you didn't feed them. I understand just looking young. That I could see having a little bit of comic relief. Oh yeah, they look so young, haha. But to know that you're the reason that they look so young because you're not feeding them, I don't know. That kind of just makes me sick. When the couple was asked why they did it, they couldn't answer police and they had a perplexed look on their face. Louise was caught on camera smiling in the courtroom. I think they've even done a few interviews that I'm not sure about, but I think they have. And to me, I don't think that they have any remorse. And that's so heartbreaking because these poor siblings, I keep wanting to call them children because I couldn't imagine this happening to an adult. These poor siblings are going to go through years and years and years of therapy, and they're going to have to learn how to be productive members of society because their parents failed them. because their parents were selfish and their parents chose to do with their lives what they wanted to. And I'm disgusted with the case. I'm shocked that it was so close to where I lived. I knew a couple friends who lived in the same cul-de-sac as them. They lived 2 blocks away from where this happened. Now, this happened before they moved into the house, but still, to know that it happened in the middle of a neighborhood, there were houses on both sides and houses behind them. How did this go unnoticed? And then it really makes you think, if they did all of this in a neighborhood, imagine the people who took their family to the middle of nowhere. The people who have a compound and they're living out their dreams with no supervision. People don't even know that they exist. These children had IDs. They were spoken for. They had identification. They technically went to school, even though they didn't. It was a homeschool, but they made sure they legally had a school. Now, if all of this could happen in that, imagine what could happen if there was nobody around to see anything. How many people are going through this at this very moment? To close us out, I just wanted to say that the Turpin couple has another court date coming up on February 23rd. And to go back to the witness from Fort Worth, Texas, when the oldest daughter was in 3rd grade, I wanted to read something that he had posted. I'm going to go ahead and insert his name around this area probably, because I don't want to butcher it, and it's just easier to do it that way. So I'm going to go ahead and read this to you that he said, and I think it's definitely touching, and it definitely makes you think when it comes to other people's situations. I think we all need to take a little time to be a little more compassionate towards other people, and I know kids are cruel. I was bullied. I was bullied severely when I was in school. So I understand that kids will be kids, but I hope that maybe what he said will go ahead and let us remember to teach our children to be a little more compassionate. I can't help but feel an overwhelming sense of guilt and shame. Of course, none of us are responsible for the events that ensued, but you can't help but feel rotten when the classmate your peers made fun of for smelling like poop quite literally had to sit in her own waste because she was chained to her bed. It is nothing but sobering to know that the person who sat across from you at the lunch table went home to squalor and filth while you went home to a warm meal and a bedtime story. And I think it's so true. I can sit here and tell you 10 million stories about what I went through and what a terrible childhood I had and how I grew up in squalor and how I was bullied for being the dirty, smelly kid. But I did not go through anything remotely close to what this is. These poor children, these poor siblings, these poor adults have to live the rest of their life knowing that they had parents that did this to them. Please, please, please go ahead, give this video a like, subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye!